Hello, beautiful. I just hit the blinds. Let's try that again. Hello, beautiful people. My name is Caitlin and welcome to my channel. Today I have my second April wrap up for you guys. At the beginning of the month, I did a mid-month wrap up because I already read 4 books and I didn't want to make a super long one at the end, so I just split it up that way. But today I have the second half for you. These are the rest of the books I read this month. So I ended up reading 5 more, which I'm super proud of myself. So let's take a look at the numbers for the whole month as a whole. I read 9 books total this month. I read 2 poetry books, 4 nonfiction books, 2 fantasy books. No, 2 fiction books and 1 fantasy book. I misspoke. So I read a whole variety of genres this month. I also read 8 books by women and 1 book by a male. So that's not as balanced as the other one, but I'm okay with that. So right now I'm gonna go through the rest of the books I read this month and tell you a little bit about them and what I thought about them. 1 book I read this month was Show Your Work by Austin Kleon. I read his first book, Steal Like an Artist, back when I was in college. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was super inspirational, so I was excited to see what I would think about this one, and I was a little disappointed, but I think it wasn't the book's fault. It's kind of where I'm at in life. If I would have read this book at the same time I read his first book, I would have loved it. However, for me, some of the things just aren't applicable anymore to where I am in my career. And then I also thought some of the things such as social media just didn't age well, but that's of course bound to happen. I still love him. Ended up giving this 2 out of 5 stars, but I still think it's worth the read. The next book I read is Panties by Andrea Gibson. Andrea Gibson is one of my favorite poets of all time. She does spoken word poetry, so if you want to get introduced to her, that would be my suggestion, the way to go. Look up one of her spoken word poetry and you're gonna love it. This book was amazing. I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars. It was a fantastic collection of poetry and it is exactly what I was looking for. She covers a wide variety of topics from mental illness to gender to feminism and love, which all those things I could talk about for days. So her poetry I thought was revolutionary and inspiring at the same time. It gave me all the feelings and it made me want to cry sometimes, but it made me want to cheer sometimes, and that's really all you could ask for. So I would highly recommend this one. The next book I read was Her Body, Our Laws on the Front Lines of the Abortion War from El Salvador to Oklahoma by Michelle Oberman. And this book kind of explores different battles over abortion throughout the world from El Salvador to America, and really focused in Oklahoma specifically. I thought overall, I think if you are really interested in the topic about abortion, you will find this book interesting. However, if you're just being introduced into this topic and are trying to learn some basic information, this book might be too overwhelming for you. It was pretty dense at times, and I had to make myself keep reading it sometimes, even though I really care about this issue. I thought the El Salvador part was super interesting and really important to know about. There's so many abortion laws in El Salvador right now that are so messed up. And there was so much to unpack in El Salvador that I almost wish she just wrote the whole book on El Salvador itself, because I thought there were a lot of layers that weren't fully addressed that should have been addressed, but maybe her next book will. Ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. It was interesting, not a must read. The next book I read was The Honey Farm by Harriet Alida Lai. I ended up doing a full review of this book in my channel. I'll link that down below. But in short, this is a fiction book that also has magical realism elements. It takes place on a honey farm, and weird things start to happen on the farm, and the characters try to figure out what is happening. I really loved the writing of this book. I think Lai has huge promise. I can't wait to read her other books. However, I didn't love the ending, so I ended up giving this 3.5 out of 5 stars. So the last book I read this month, and it's probably my favorite book of the month, maybe next to Children of Blood and Bone, but it is How Dare the Sun Rise by Sandra. That's her last name. I don't want to mispronounce it because I really respect her and I don't want to do that to her. This is a memoir about Sandra, she grew up in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and she grew up with war around her all the time. She ended up having to go to a refugee camp, and there at the refugee camp, shortly after she moved there, her refugee camp was attacked, and her sister was murdered along with a couple hundred other people that were living there. She ends up getting the chance to move to America, where, of course, she thinks her life is going to get way better. And although it does get better in some ways, she experiences racism for the first time. I thought this book was so well written. It's full of compassion and understanding, and it's so important, I think, for everyone to read in order to understand not only what is happening in other countries, but what is happening in our own country. I also really loved what she said about mental illness in this book and dealing with PTSD. I can relate to that, and I think she did a really, really good job explaining that and kind of dealing with the clashes between her family and her, dealing with that. Overall, this book tackled so many things. It's a fast read. It's an easy read as far as like the language goes, and you're really into it, so it's fast, but the subject matter obviously is very dense. So these were all the books I read in April. I'm very excited about it, and I'm even more excited for May, and I can't wait to show you what I'm reading, which will be my next video. If you read any of these books, please comment below and let's talk about them. If you are like, well, I don't know, this book kind of sounds interesting, but I don't know if I should read it or not, comment below. I'll convince you or not convince you to read it. Yeah, I hope you guys have an amazing day, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.